Welcome everyone to the J3U podcast. Today's episode, we are doing a Coach's Corner, Ask the Coach. We have all the J3U coaches here, myself and Cory Hageman and Joseph Pircher, and we have questions sent in from all of y'all to answer just regarding your own personal questions probably or around coaching. And so we're going to dive in. So ladies first. Cory. How's it going? I want to say, if you don't know Cory or Joseph, I've recorded individual episodes with them as well. So we've done deep dives on their stories and them going into their knowledge set. So, but anyway, Cory, how's it going? Where are you currently at?
So I'm almost 2.5 months post show. I'm good. I think I went through that period where I'm like, I'm feeling better. And then you let food come up a little bit more, you let weight come up a little bit more. And then you're like, oh, actually now I'm feeling better. It was good because I think this really just this past week, I started to feel some of those adaptations drop off, specifically with sleep. That was one that during prep the entire time was disrupted. And I'm actually sleeping through the night. And 2.5 months post show, that's not bad. But it is it's nice to see that returning to normal. So
how disrupted was it coming from?
How disrupted was it?
Yeah, what was the worst? I was waking up 4 times a night.
So it started 6-7 weeks into prep, and it was 30 minutes to 40 minutes after I would fall asleep, and then every hour. And that was pretty consistent the rest of the way through. So another 8 to 10 weeks. But yeah, towards the end, I swear it was 20 minutes after I fell asleep every single night. And even after wrapping up the season, it was still that way for, that first month. It still felt so dysregulated.
That is really disruptive. I know we got a question on that too. And I think that's a great telltale sign of, when you are fully recovered. Because I guarantee you, when you're waking up every hour, you're not in a position to build muscle, right? Post-show. So post-show anabolic window. No, it's all catabolic sleep window.
So. There was no rebound from a muscular standpoint. It was just
survive.
Survive. Stop starving. Yeah, but it's good. I feel like I'm out of the worst part of it, and I think even hunger signalings are starting to return to normal, which is exciting because I can't remember the last time that I'm going into meals where I'm feeling full and I'm finishing a meal and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that again immediately.
Cool. And Joseph, man, where are you at?
Yeah, so currently I'm in the midst of a quick kind of mini cut, kind of clean up, from a PED standpoint, cleanup phase. We got to a point where he had to dial things back in a lawn massing phase, and not even really from a blood work perspective. Everything still had looked good, even at kind of peak levels. I just was a little bit soft, so needed to clean things up to kind of set up the next phase. So I have a couple weeks left in that, and then we're going to transition back and just continue on the never-ending quest to try to be big. So that's where things are.
You kind of have to weigh in the long-term mental aspect in an extended off season too, to be hey, 2 years we're going to be choking down food and uncomfortable. It's man, there needs to be some breathers in there where you can have some relief from the mental side to persevere in an off season for that long. But yeah,
I was ready for it.
You were ready, man.
Yeah, I was ready. I think it was I think we had done 26 or 28 weeks, something like that. So it was a lot. Yeah, I was getting to the point where I was just kind of disgusted with my food all the time. And you almost get to the point where you're so full and saturated with food that your pumps go in the other direction. And that's kind of where I was. So I was kind of not burnt out, but just kind of ready for a transition of a different phase to kind of freshen up both physically, mentally, clean up how things looked, and then, dive back in for another long go at it.
Right on. And for me, I'm just 2 weeks post.
Yeah. What about you, John?
Yes, I am 2 weeks post prep, ending my prep. So foods come up, kind of doing like a maintenance holding phase. Brought PDs down just to take a break before making this transition to do like an open show for next year. So food has slowly been incrementally increasing, and I don't have like a ton of. I wasn't that far into prep, but still I was far enough to where body fat came down to where sleep was starting to get impacted. And there's like some slight food focus every now and then. Food's fine now, but sleep, I'll still wake up like 1 hour before the time I would prefer to wake up. And then the last hour is like off and on. So usually I know when I'm back, I'm like 8 hours straight uninterrupted. So I'm gonna over the next like 6 weeks just let body fat and weight slowly move up a little bit to where I'll see that dissipate. Then I'll really push forward into the next like push phase. So,
John, can I ask you, side note, how long are you giving yourself once you get into that next push? How long do you have it mapped out for? Is it 20, 24 weeks, something like that?
Yeah, it should be about 18 weeks. And that's going to just be also dependent on where body fat goes to.
Sure.
It's through the holidays. So, I mean, it might be a 12-week phase.
Yeah, you're such a reckless eater. Yeah.
Yeah. So that'll kind of dictate it, and then how long I'll need to make sure I give myself the prep.
Sure.
Anyway, we'll get into our questions. First question.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's go. We'll get one from Heel with Steel, which is Daniel. And Daniel's asked, out of all the levers you pulled during a contest prep, which lever is the most underrated? So just some context. He's talking about sleep or nutrition or PEDs or training cardio, like all these different things that you can pull on. Which one is someone not using, or getting the most out of, or even recognizing that it is a lever? Joseph, you're like, had interest.
Yeah, I thought this. Yeah, this was a good one, and Daniel's our buddy, so happy to answer this one. I honestly, if you listen to the podcast that I did with you when we talked about prep, just the biggest one, hands down, that I see consistently from one person to the next, being exposed to helping more and more people through your platform, John, it's sleep, in my experience, hands down. It's just this forgotten piece of the entire puzzle it plays such a crucial role in both directions. Like if you're trying to put on new muscle tissue, sleep is going to be your best friend. And then if you're trying to preserve it and, be really accurate with just pulling body fat off, sleep is going to be such a huge role too. And I just think people, especially in this day and age of all the stimulus that comes at us all the time, phones, laptops, tablets, all these things, we all need to be on social media. People have just kind of thrown out the idea of setting a routine or time aside to prepare for sleep. It's just like you're glued to this phone and then you click it off and expect that you're just going to fall right asleep. Like if that's you, that is a genetic gift that you don't even understand that you have, because for most of us, like I know for just me personally, like I need dedicated time and like a somewhat of a little routine that's going to set me up to prepare this crazy mind of mine to fall asleep. So I think that's the biggest one. I mean, I feel like we can talk on sleep all day and we could talk about on fatigue management and all these other things. But to me, if I had to give one singular answer that is just so underrated, overlooked, however you want to word it, it's sleep. So for anybody that's listening to this, like I said, in either season that you have going on, kind of invest back into that sleep pattern and your sleep habit. And there will be a tangible difference to your physique, more so than adjusting any of the other aspects. I feel like you get a true, tangible, physical difference in how you feel and how you look just from good sleep.
I know, like you're like the busy-minded overthinker, which is a lot of us, of course. So, like, what were the big things that you do now that help you specifically shut down?
Yeah, you have to, especially like working with clients and stuff and kind of making your own schedule now, and everything we do is just on a screen. you need to set like a hard time for yourself of when your workday is over, which I've been, I could come on this podcast and tell you I have all these great solutions and routines and all these things, but that's not real life. Real life has happened, especially when I was, we had just gotten the opportunity to start with you on your platform, and my client volume was like higher than anything that I had really ever even expected. I was up, I would leave it or pick at the work all throughout the day. And then I'm up until I look up and it's 2 or 2:30 in the morning and I'm still on this laptop, and it's like, man, this is bad news. So I think just setting a time, like, and in your own personal life, whether you work for yourself or what have you, just set kind of a hard schedule for yourself, like you would for anything else. Like you get up and go to work for 9 o'clock every day. You're at the gym at 6 o'clock every day. Like you need to set a time that you're starting your wind down, like whether it's 9 or 10 o'clock. So doing that, and then reading, like just physically reading books. I've always been a reader, and I kind of have gotten away from it as technology has kind of taken over our lives. And then putting that into kind of fill that last 90 minutes or 60 minutes before I wind down, because it's like I find myself being like obsessed with having something because I'm used to having my phone. So replacing that with a book, it kind of has helped me kind of tire my eyes and get me ready for sleep.
Cory, do you have any add-ons?
Yeah. No, I'm really glad, Joseph. I'm really glad you touched on that, because I do agree. And I can say this prep is the first prep where I've prioritized my sleep recovery, and my answer to this question honestly was going to be fatigue management, which goes hand in hand with sleep. Sleep is very important and different than managing stress, whether that's physical or mental. And it's going to vary client to client. One of the questions that we have on our intake form is, how do you perceive your stress on a scale of 1 to 10? And this is something that I've found with majority of my clients, whether lifestyle, whether in season, off season, their stress management is almost directly, their ability to manage whatever perceived stress they have it's going to directly correlate with their success on any kind of program. It's going to significantly make them think that the program is harder or that it's not very hard. And I think whenever you're in a contest prep setting, because that's kind of how I interpreted this question is like, when you're in prep, you really have to manage stress before you have to manage stress while it's manageable. And that's something that I think is important as a coach to be able to work with your clients on actively. Hey, how are you managing the stress so that that isn't that bad? At the very beginning of prep, when food is getting lower, when cardio is getting higher, what's your perception around this? What's your internal dialogue? Because oftentimes I think people will leave stress until it's at a point where you can't ignore it, and it's just in your face, and it's a serious problem, and maybe it is starting to affect you physically. And it's presenting in ways that you're like, what, I can't put this on the back burner anymore. So I do think going into prep at the very beginning and making that a priority, and I know we say this about sleep, hydration, training, recovery, everything. I mean, they kind of need to be prioritized as someone would diet, training, cardio. They all need to be equal because they do have an impact. And if you go months without managing them, at best, you're leaving potential progress on the table. Worst, you're being set back either, literally through an injury or, sickness. But I do think a lot of people wait until the end to be like, what, I'm overwhelmed. And coach, what can we do to work on this? And it's like, no, that was something we needed to work on in the off season when you wrote on your intake form, hey, my stress is an 8. We didn't need to wait until you were at a very low body fat. And, I think that kind of even just ties into training and being able to assess, hey, are you recovering appropriately in whatever season? Is your volume appropriate? And if you feel like any part of your recovery isn't optimized, okay, well, you might not have the best solution right then, but what are you doing currently to work towards finding that solution? Or what interventions are you trying? And I think that's a pretty important lever, and it's unconventional. It's different from the diet, the cardio, the PEDs, but I think it plays a role in how you look once you're actually on stage.
I strongly agree with all those. And I think some of the biggest issues for people not getting into contest shape is not having enough time and also not managing fatigue. So you're not managing fatigue, you're not going to be able to push hard enough at the end to get into that contest shape that you need. But I think what all of y'all have said too is that for one, these levers we're talking about, for some people, they don't even exist. You know, they're already not even on the table to be used because we should be addressing them like in our pre-prep phase. Like how many clients come in and be like, all right, cool, 16-week prep, let's go, coach. Like, oh, not 16 weeks out, but also you need to like establish a lot of things to a good position to even begin a prep. Like Joseph, you're saying like people have booked out their day, then it's like, well, how much time do I have left for sleep? It's like, no. Pre-prep phase, let's position our whole day around making sure you're going to have enough of that sleep once you enter in a prep. Because what happens in prep? More cardio, less time to do all these other things that you're filling in your day with, which is all that makes is their day expands and then sleep suffers, which is pretty much our number one recovery tool. Because we'll see, like, you have less sleep, like you'll lose, for every pound you lose, a smaller percentage of it is going to come from body fat. So you'd be less productive losing body fat. Also, cortisol being higher will drive higher hunger hormone signaling. Like your prep's going to feel really, really hard that way. And then too, like Cory, you're right. Like that same routine, if not managed around what's your relationships like, what is your financial status like? Like people are prepping with the rock bottom budget, and like like I have a person I know, she like taking like put all this stuff in her credit card, like supplements and all these things. Like so after prep it was a mess, but it's like you're not got to position yourself in a good spot overall to even have a lever for sleep and stress management to utilize. All right.
No, yeah, those are all really good points. And something I wanted to add on too is even working with the client in that pre-prep period where you're trying to figure out, okay, what are their expectations and do they have those resources to meet those expectations? Because, this was from a different podcast a couple weeks ago where listening that, it is your job as the coach to figure out what are your clients' expectations and do they believe that they're realistic for what they're willing to do? Because I what you just said, like people will come to Joseph and I and they'll say, hey, I'm ready to start immediately. And I'm actually very willing to be like, hey, okay, I challenge you. Let's go through the checklist of like all the things you're going to have to do tomorrow. If you can do those and your current structure, your schedule is going to allow for that, we can have a discussion about it, but there's a very, very small chance that you're going to be able to make that transition just like that. And if you expect to be able to do this, to do contest prep at this level, it's not going to be something you kind of just do in the background. Like it's not something you can just get by on a couple hours a week, a couple additional hours in the gym. It's like, no, that's the foundation outside of prep. The prepping will only get harder the longer you do it.
I came across a cool app. It was called the Headspace app. It was, it's popular if you've heard. It's like basically a meditation app. And it'll like notify you throughout the day. Like you can set all kinds of things, but it'll have like wind down, one for sleep, which most people don't have wind downs, or it has like a daily morning, like get your mind right perspective one. Pretty cool app. Like if you need something to like, hey, you need to do these things, it's a nice reminder.
Something like that could hold you accountable. Sorry, Cory, go ahead.
No, you're good. Yeah, I use I think it's Pomodoro, and it's like it's a timer, and you can just like it's the same. We all have it on our iPhones, the do not disturb, and you just this one will like set your work mode for 30 minutes, and I think also I just set up it's the step above night shift where it's like sleep mode.
Yeah.
Where it like if you set it to like 11 p.m., if you're going to bed at midnight, like me, like a lunatic, then at 11, it'll like shut your phone kind of like halfway down. So it'll be like, are you sure you want to log on to your phone at this time? Like you're supposed to wind down. You're not supposed to be like on Instagram, on
it takes
YouTube.
like multiple swipes, right? To like
Yeah.
open up, like I'm not quite ready. I know you're telling me to be ready, but
yeah. All those little things, like we've tons of access to things like that, I mean, like if someone's struggling with it, I would just encourage them to look at things like Headspace or Joseph, I don't know if you use any apps like that, just to like time block, but like they're really helpful, especially if it's something it's consistent struggle.
Yeah, I'll have to check them out. I haven't used any of them, but they sound great.
Yeah.
Well, we covered that one pretty good. You want to move to the next one?
Yeah. What which one are you thinking?
I'm thinking drugs.
Always, right?
Yeah, if I don't bring up one on drugs with Cory, the drug expert. we're joking because Cory, like on her IG story, she's getting like all these PED questions now. But anyway, yeah, at underscore my name Milan asked, can we do a cycle with only with orals without testosterone, saying they have a fear of needles. So if Cory, would you want to start that one and jump into
Cory,
the
this is all
female perspective?
Yeah. Well, and I would love both of y'all's input here, because I when I was looking at these questions, I broke it down to different client situations where I've had someone who, was afraid of needles, and that was a pretty firm boundary they set, which I respect. I think as a first-time female PED user, you do have to feel out their comfortability, and I think it's really important to make sure that communication is like crystal clear. However, with that being said, like I think I've had a few interactions so far where it's actually very rare that once I explain to a client who's open to using PEDs, it's very rare that they continue forward with that fear, because the education on it, I mean, like I just lay it out. Hey, here are your options. Here's the associated risk with using something that is an oral versus an injectable, versus not exactly knowing if it truly is what you think you're getting. So I had this question fairly recently, Primo or Anavar, and that's something that I know in the female PED module you cover, John, that it really does depend. If your Primo is tested, fantastic. If it's not, and you have access to farm grade Anavar, I mean, you might consider going with the Anavar in that case over something that you aren't certain is actually what it is. Now, that was one sub answer that I don't know, I came to with this question, because this person also says without test. Well, there's also a case I can see to be made for someone who has PCOS, who, if they're already running higher than natural baseline levels, if they're over 50, and let's just say they're very, very resistant to starting TRT, okay, but they would like to leverage anabolic, maybe there is a discussion that can be had in their instance. If their levels naturally are right around 100 or even over 100, I would want to look at our options, but that isn't going to be the case for most people.
Or do you think with females that is the barrier to entry of choosing always Anavar? Is it the needle option, or is it just that is the education that's out there and what's offered?
From my current clientele, I can say it's like largely the education. And once I explain, like, hey, here is why Anavar wouldn't be our first tool, they're all about it. I mean, they're very understanding, and it actually makes sense. And I think it offers that reassurance of using a safer use model, that they don't even realize, oh, I do care about this, and this is something well past the point of competing. I probably will end up doing anyway, just to improve my health markers. Now, yes, the fear of needles, I feel like is one of the biggest barriers. And if someone's unwilling to discuss injectables, even after the education, even after we've gone through kind of that entrance counseling, if they're still very firm on like, no, Anavar is the only thing I'm willing to use, and I have no interest in restoring my test levels to normal levels, not super physiological, I would actually question, I would also want to know, okay, what are their long-term goals with competing? Do they have realistic goals and expectations? But it would kind of signal to me as a coach, that's a little bit of red flag to still want to use Anavar, even knowing the risk. It would tell me, maybe there is a gap with trusting me as a coach, trusting my recommendation. And yeah, it's with females, it's I wish it was more straightforward, but I think that's why talking about these things and putting out educational content, I mean, generally, I think the more we do that, the less chance of running into this in the future.
Do you want to just touch on, Cory, of why would you choose Primo over Anavar?
Yes, yeah, and this is actually something that kind of does hit close to home for me, because I have a friend who I believe went through I guess the reasons. Primo is at the dose that you would be taking Primo. I mean, you're not taking a high amount, but because it is highly faked, oftentimes it's faked for test. And if you're taking the equivalent dose in test, not only you 100% will viralize, you'll viralize so quickly. And a lot of these side effects for female users, I mean, sure, some of them are reversible, some of them can be managed, a lot of them aren't. And the fact is, like, you have women who are just getting into the sport, they've been lifting a couple years. And, I have a girl I know who is 22, 23, maybe been in the gym 2-3 years. I believe what she was exposed to wasn't Primo. She was told it was, and you can hear a very, very significant deepening in the voice. Not one of those, it's like, well, maybe she just has like, maybe she's a little
smoking. It was a smoker.
No. Yeah. Smoked a lot of cigarettes in those 8 weeks, but yeah, I mean, it might make more sense to go with the Anavar in the case that you can guarantee it's Anavar, because the dose that you would be starting at, or that you should be starting at, 2.5 milligrams, 5 milligrams, that even if it, let's just say worst case scenario, it's not Anavar, well, it's still at such low of a dose that you shouldn't be incurring the same or nearly the side effects you would if you were taking 15, 30 milligrams of testosterone. And yeah, I mean, that you can, someone asked me, I think last week, how do you know if your source is good? You don't. Like, there are, yeah, you can assume, you can be told, you can get it from a lab. There's a lot of ways that you can just make yourself feel better, but especially when for female users, you should assume, hey, there is a chance I'm going to incur these side effects. And if not now, I should still assume that I could. There is always that chance. And I think if you operate and you kind of navigate PEDs with that respect for what you're doing, what you're leveraging, you reduce the likelihood that you're going to end up with irreversible effects in your early 20s or in your first few years of being enhanced.
I'll add on, like, for females in regard. Say the Primo and Anavar is 100%, we know this is real on a milligram per milligram basis comparatively. Absolutely, like, viralization is the greatest risk posed to female. However, with Anavar, there is a lot more acute risk that can come about because it is an oral, so you have the liver toxicity issue, and not really with Primo. So we see like rapid lipid changes Within 1 week of 5 milligrams of Anavar, you'll see HDL significantly drop down. Also, liver enzymes can be relatively fairly skewed. So in a, hey, I'm going to be using this for the X number of weeks, that's a good chunk of time with a fairly skewed liver and lipid profile versus primobolan not posing that risk. And we see probably relatively they're about doing the same things in the body at a milligram basis. I think the other thing, or what you see like people using with Anavar, is a lot of like first time cycles are 10 mg of Anavar per day, which is 70 mg per week, which a lot of people aren't using 70 milligrams of primobolan per week. So that dosage is already like a pretty big jump up for a female to use. I think you made a great point though. Should all females be starting with a TRT dose of testosterone? And that might not be necessarily so, but again, if you're going to be using 70 milligrams per week of a compound, you're likely going to shut down the whole HPO axis to where once you stop taking it, you're going to have low testosterone, low estrogen, progesterone. This will have to restart. So you're coming now from this real suboptimal hormone level back up, and you're going to see these fluctuations happen. If you're a competitor, that's the argument of like, a TRT would be in place. But if you're already like hyperandrogynous, like a PCOS with high testosterone, doesn't justify quite TRT, but we just have to go off labs from there.
Right. I'm sorry. I wanted to ask, because this was an issue that you helped me manage actually last year when we started working together. Because I see this still now. DHEA is commonly that push from, I would say, coaches for increasing test levels. But there are there's a lot that goes on with introducing DHEA. And I really wanted to get your thoughts on, if you have someone who is adamant, no needles, no injections. Okay, well, if their estrogen is not elevated, if their progesterone is also within range, would DHEA be a viable solution to increase test if that client is, hey, there's no way TRT is happening, my test is low, I still want to move forward?
Yeah, I think absolutely so. DHEA just isn't it can be a little messier because it metabolizes into several different metabolites. One could be estrogen, but also testosterone. So depending on how this person's set up genetically for those enzymes that convert, might just have an increase in estrogen more, or they might not have the testosterone rise that you might want to see. But it definitely is a route to go through. Something on that too is if you want to see if they're also having like high cortisol, low DHEA to begin with, and maybe that's why the testosterone could be lower. It might be indicative of just some type of adrenal insufficiency. Usually you'll see DHEA be more problematic with the adrenal aspect, which would be address number one primary reason first, then consider DHEA. So it could be, but also you have to consider there's other delivery systems for testosterone besides injections for TRT. You absolutely could do a testosterone cream. They probably have patches, or they have
the beads. It's another one.
Yeah. I mean, I still prefer for a female, you could do a sub-Q injection. For males, we do sub-Q injections. So it's a fairly painless injection. A lot of people think I'm going to need this huge harpoon, and it's really not the case. Like the amount that you do, it's fairly benign and painless. So, but there are other options available.
Mm-hmm.
I know the person that asked this question was definitely coming from the male perspective, and he's got a lot of female perspective of that rationale. But we can dive into the male rationale behind why we wouldn't just do oral cycles without testosterone. Do you want me to kick that off, Just? Do you want to?
Yeah, no, feel free.
Okay, yeah. So the main risk around any type of anabolic use for male is going to be heart, brain, kidney function, and posing stress to those systems. And one of the most protective hormones that we do have is estrogen. We see, you name it, nandrolone, testosterone deployed with aromatase inhibitors. Anytime when there's a high anabolic load and low estrogen, we see increased toxicity in the brain. We see lipid abnormalities. Definitely can pose more issues to the kidneys. So estrogen is this very protective hormone that we need in place from a longevity aspect. So when moving into using a higher load of anabolics, you want estrogen present. So I asked, if you are going to take an oral, where is your estrogen going to come from? That's kind of the one thing. And there's going to be caveats to that because there's orals that do aromatize. The next aspect around that is also what do you do after the oral cycle? And this also is in factoring in, thirdly, the longevity of the oral cycle. So what happens when you do take oral, where you're going to shut down natural testosterone? And then the longevity aspect is that you're only going to do this for 4 to 6 weeks, maybe. You're going to rapidly incur higher stress loads than a female would with an oral cycle because you're going to need a higher load to bring about the changes that you do want to see. So health markers are going to get detrimented very quickly. So you'll have to stop. You'll have low testosterone levels. Then what do? Well, I'll do a PCT, which is going to take a long duration for a lot of times to restore those levels. You're going to have a big dip in hormone levels. Psychologically, it's already really challenging too. Then what do you do again? Well, I'm just going to run more oral cycles. Okay, same process. All that oxidation we've talked about in the brain, the heart, the kidneys. Think about every system in the body exposed to this, the skin, testes. This one, why testosterone function doesn't always keep coming back up to the same level because of oxidative stress to the testes. So you're going to get to a point where you're going to require TRT. So the continued use of orals as a male leads you to a point to have to inject testosterone. So it's the same endpoint. So there's that aspect, but also you're going to see like probably a high risk of health detriment. Now going back to point one, where is your estrogen going to be coming from? They had this same discussion like way back in the 60s because who wants to just inject testosterone all the time? Problem solved. We'll have methylated testosterone. Enter dianabol. Dianabol is a mess, right?
Yeah.
It aromatizes into a methylated estradiol. That's why you hold just a ton of water on it. And it's not the same as the normal estradiol you get from the aromatization of testosterone. It's just not a long-term solution. Can you imagine running D-ball? Yeah, I'll do this for the next 20 years. No way. It's not possible. So, but then say like, oh no, I'm good with that. Well, even then 0.23, it doesn't consider the longevity aspect. So I would consider like what you mentioned, Cory, is like, we really need to consider what the long-term gain is here. And if you don't want to pose yourself to that amount of risk, don't do it at all because you're all going down the same road of requiring to inject testosterone anyway. So I would say use that as a start point. We mentioned you can do subcutaneous injections with insulin syringes. It's pretty painful. I think your training is probably more painful than an injection with an insulin.
Oh, it better be.
It better be. I mean, it's pretty minuscule, like a 29 gauge insulin syringe. So that's what I would say. Like, hey, if you're hesitant on that, just really, really wait and consider what you want to do long-term in bodybuilding. Because I will say, once you start doing these oral cycles and you see that response, you're going to keep going. Like,
oh yeah,
it's not like, oh, I just want to try it out and see if I like it. Like, you're going to like it. It's phenomenal. Like,
that's famous last words. I'm going to do one cycle and then I'm done forever.
Just
famous
one hit.
last words.
Yeah. Now I get there's some guys that, 1-2 years later, they're like, you know what, this really isn't for me. And I would still pose that testosterone is still more benign risk than using orals on and off and on and off. And so you still see people like after 1-2 years, you're still able to restore testosterone level to a certain level, fertility to a certain level. So I still think it would be the less detriment to health. I don't know. I know that covered a lot of ground. Any add-ons or questions?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess something I do want to add on because it's come up a lot in these Q&As I've done more recently, the exclusive drug ones, they a lot of women, you know, have wanted to understand, you know, hey, like what if test is the safer route, if that's something that I should be on, why are coaches so hesitant to recommend it? And I mean, I've been fortunate that I had people reach out who are very open-minded, and they truly do want to further their education. So, you know, that conversation, I think is helpful, but I think it's still, there's a long way that the female side of things has to go before it is acceptable to say, hey, you know what, you're not going to be able to manage or even monitor serum levels if you're taking Anavar. Like, I mean, that's not something you get to titrate. If you start incurring side effects, well, that's the outcome. And if this is the only cycle you're going to do, okay, well, that's great. But also now you've exposed your risk to virilization, but you've also, if you're running anabolics, if you're using anabolics during even during a prep, you know, what is the actual return? Whereas, you know, when I need to take a step back and weigh out what are the benefits of having normal test levels for someone who's also putting themselves in that same setting, the prep setting, you know, where cortisol is higher, it seems very obvious that you would want things to be at least within the range that they're meant to be in. But I think just continuing to educate, I think that's gonna help kind of make that connection for competitors, for clients.
That's a tough one to swallow, right? As a testosterone as a female, because it's these hormones are looked very at like that's a male hormone and these are your female hormones. But truthfully, we have all three, just different amounts. But you're right, like say in a contest prep, your testosterone levels dropping down, wouldn't it make sense to be that's the hormone that you bring back up to keep it optimal, just like thyroid hormones dropping down, or you know, any of these other hormones, you just bring them back up to optimal. Or if you're female that's lower, like bringing that up just a little bit higher was still within the female range. And we've, you know, hit these points of like testosterone being, you know, you can get, you know, bioidentical, allowing for those natural metabolites to occur. We have some of the best long-term data on female testosterone at the physiological level, showing completely safe and no risk of virilization because you're within the physiological limits. We just want to keep you there and keep you on like towards the higher end if you're like a competitor, right? It's something you're able to actually test in labs. So if you went and got your serum labs pulled, you're taking 3 milligrams of testosterone, we could associate that with a serum lab value. Can't do that with any other hormone. And so you can see your actual individual response from it. And also extremely easy to get testosterone, and it's never really faked. It's maybe underdosed, which that poses even less risk to a female. And we even have like elite level females to compare to. I think you probably looked at just my lecture and I'm like, what was it? I think it was like 30% of elite female athletes have levels that are close to like PCOS levels. Yeah. So I mean, there's a clear advantage to having like higher testosterone levels as a female across multiple sports, higher lean body mass, higher performance, endurance capacity. So from a starting point, what's the first androgen you bring in as a female? You can make a very, very good argument for testosterone. And that's actually was like with Renee, this was it 4 years ago? Like she had low testosterone, and it wasn't even a thought of like, what's the first anabolic we should use for you, Renee? It just kind of worked out like, hey, we just need to like you to be healthy, and that was it. And then like, you know, credit to like Victor Black, because he's brought a lot of this kind of thought process through actually into a framework of testosterone being like the first one and having a very good rationale and argument for it. So yeah. Anything else to say on that? I think we can move on to our next question. Which we'll probably do one more. Which one stands out? Maybe The backstage one?
Well,
Push stage
we
one?
each kind of picked one. So why don't you pick one? Yeah, you mentioned the backstage one.
Okay, I guess I'm leaning into that, right?
Yeah.
So at Petite Bon Home in Muscle, IG name's killing me. Any advice on managing backstage minutes, hours before going on stage? And someone else had asked about how many carbs backstage, so I kind of lumped those questions in just overall together. But they're basically asking like, how do you manage like when to eat, when to pump up, all of those components around the backstage period.
I can start this one if that.
Yeah, Cory, go.
Yeah. Well, this prep, what John, you and I were able to see is like there's a show I went into where we were being a little more conservative, and then we realized, okay, for the next show, we're gonna make it to where I'm going into show day truly waking up at like 90% capacity, and that ended up being a lot more favorable for the look we were trying to bring to stage. Now, to do that, to make that show day seamless, that means one, knowing what look you're actually going for, having an idea, having a generally clear picture of how full do you want to be. It also means being able to replicate that. And I think this season for me, it was the first time I was able to replicate a very consistent look for several weeks in a row. And I think especially for bigger guys who you are, you have to show like you there is really no such thing as like a lot of guys aren't getting on stage flat. Like you have to be not just full, but towards that upper end of how much you can handle. You can't try to fit that all in the day of the show. I mean, especially with the emphasis on keeping your waist tight and even just the timing. I mean, like usually your male divisions, you're going on pretty early. You want to be going to bed the night before in a position where you really don't have a lot of work to do the next day, but you still have enough room to modify that look if needed. If you wake up and for whatever reason that you're waking up different than how you have been waking up at, well, maybe you can be a little more conservative. But I would say like I've found a lot of success in not having a ton of work to have to do backstage. That takes away the urgency. It takes away the stress of not knowing how many meals do I need to bring with me actually backstage. I really think if you have the look nailed and you know what you're going for, making sure you're on track the night before. So then the morning of, if you need 1 meal, 2 meals, okay, 3 meals, maybe you're burning through food at a really fast rate. You have the ability to get that food in without having to slam it, without having to do something completely different on show day.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah,
I agree. Like,
all really good stuff. Yeah. I think your point about like the emphasis on waist control is such a big piece of all of this then, because I feel like, especially on the guy side, I see a lot of stuff where guys almost like take pride, or it's almost like a brag thing, how much they're eating the 36 hours or less before a show. And it just is another one of these examples. We could talk about it having gone through John's like, peaking process. We could talk about all these different variables that people throw, shit at the wall and see what sticks. They're throwing Hail Marys up in the final, 24 hours before getting on stage. So it's like, they do this big depletion leading into it, and then they want to cram in a bunch of food, and it just, all of these moving variables make it just that much harder to nail it. So I think being in a good spot when you're backstage starts, at 3 weeks out, like being ready at 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks out. And then you're just kind of recreating the same look day after day and finding at what moment, at what body weight, how many meals in, how much fluid in, what recipe did you put together that resulted in this final look? Like Cory, you made such a great point, like having that kind of ideal look already in your head, already cemented, like this is what we're going for. Because without that, you're kind of shooting for a moving target. You don't really know what you're shooting for. so having, I can speak for myself going through it the way that John and I did it, where we just, at 3 weeks out, we're ready. And then now we're just kind of finding the same look over and over. I read this question almost as part of it, of course, like the X's and O's of when to eat and pump up, but also the way that they worded it, it makes me wonder, like managing backstage. I wonder like how much they meant like the stress, psychology side of it, which again, all these things that you mentioned, Cory, like we're talking about being ready ahead of time, having the look set that we want to, knowing what the recipe was to get to that look. All of that is going to instill confidence that allows you then to be calm and confident backstage, where it's not a million different variables going on. It feels, I've been part of those peaks where there's all these different variables coming in, do this with sodium, don't do this with water, do this, don't do this, and then pose for 3 minutes and then send me pictures. It's like, it feels, when you're in the middle of it, it feels like this big elaborate thing that isn't likely to nail where you want it to. Whereas like, it's such a contrast to what happened with you and I, John, where it's like, I brought a huge body pillow backstage and I just laid down, like for at most of my day backstage, I was just laying down. And then I'd send photos when you wanted to see photos. And it's like, even before I got your feedback back, I'd be like, okay, our best look was, 196.2 after this amount of water and this amount of food. It's like, okay, I know if that best look was after 3 meals and I send you pictures after 2 meals and I'm 194, it's like, okay, another meal and some fluid probably needs to go in. So it all becomes like a very predictable process when you set things up the right way. So I could even say that being calm and manage backstage starts at 32 weeks out, when you should start the whole pre-prep process. But I would say just,
it's such a take back of control, right? Like
Cory nailed it. Yeah. And like, we're all such control freaks being in this industry that you want to control. That level of control gives you confidence. So that's, if this 10-minute little rant here is there's any takeaways, it's just having that kind of set look and knowing what it takes to get to that set look set in stone for you ahead of time. It's going to instill a lot of confidence, and then a lot of just calm that you'll be able to have backstage, which of course then we know leads on to being on stage and being composed and physically looking your best.
Yeah, I think just the backstage area can be just a shit show of uncontrol. The environment, you can't even control the environment when you're also in a variable system that's uncontrollable as well. Like if you pull the lever on diuretics, fluid manipulation, sodium, and then you have a coach you're trying to get good quality picks to, then that's kind of shoddy. And then, the show's pushed back an hour. And now you have this really dynamic system. It's like, no one can control that. It's a mess. And that's when people can really miss, because they're not having that predictable look that they've kind of already established. And I think from a coaching side, I know it's all visuals, but the scale is pretty helpful once you're peeled. You're not going to look vastly different at, say, 196 versus 196 at a different time. How does that work? Oh, you're super soft now at 196, but before you're hard at 196. Like, no, this is pretty good information. Like, and I think using the scale is a really helpful tool as a coach. I used to never do that. It was just like, here, just off how you look. Like, we don't go, doesn't matter what we weigh. And true, yes, that is. But in something that we can gain some control back in a very uncontrollable situation like backstage, I think it does make you land that predictable look. And times when I've had a mess backstage is when I don't know what's going on. And that's how I kind of read it. Like that a lot of times backstage, I felt this way out of loop. And there's
no worse feeling. There's not a worse feeling that you can have.
And at those times I was using approaches that were all over the board. Like I couldn't understand it. Like it's just, it's hopes and dreams and prayers or whatever. So, with going into the backstage area, I would say try to be close to the stage when you do set up. That way you have an idea of who's actually going on, or if you have a friend or family member that's close, that's out in the audience, like texting, like, all right, this is who's going on right now. Because the expediters are always inaccurate. They're telling you to pump up, like blaze up.
They're always
like,
so early.
dude,
They're always so early.
It's an hour, like seriously, an hour before you actually need to do it. And then you're all like pumped up and it's all faded away and you blaze all dry. Like, all right, I guess I'll go out anyway. I did this my like second show at the Texas State. There was like a weight room, right, with weights and stuff in it. Then they're like, pump up, everybody pump up. So we're like, oh, pumped up. Then they move you into another room, which I thought would be, where you go out on stage. Well, it was this huge auditorium area. The floor was ice cold, the blowing cold air. And there was 5 lines of guys. Like, oh no, like, forget it. Pump way gone. Like, and I had like juice water in this show too. So if I had just like I'm gonna walk out and see where the stage is and what's going on, oh man, I would have had such a better idea. Other tips like in that regard, since that show is like I always wear like sandals or my socks like till I walk out on stage to keep my feet warm, because in case there's like it's cold back there, because you'll lose a lot of heat out of your feet. So just don't walk out with your socks on, of course. So that's like been one thing that I do. Another issue, because I've gone out with like looking like I forgot to put posing oil on, which is like, then you get the criticism, right? Like, John, put some posing oil on. It's like, dude, I had it on. It dries up and right away, So I'll bring my own oil back there and pay for who you work so hard. Like, pay for someone to come back there with you and stand in line and fucking glaze you up. Like Renee and I, when we compete together, we're like spraying each other down with like, glaze. So you walk out there and you make sure you're like, your posing oil is good, because that is the one thing that is kind of uncontrollable, right? We can nail the look, but if you don't have oil on, like that could be a detriment. So those are at least like 2 things that come to mind.
I was going to add on to that just because it's for bikini wellness. Like I've experienced that too, where I didn't get glazed. I got glazed too early. So, I mean, like by the time I got on stage, Patrick, he texted me, he's like, you didn't put any oil on. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're the only person up there who looks like dry. And, I guess my tip like that, if you're having, if you're using your own, great. But if you have the tanning company, if they're backstage, like communicate with them and tell them like, hey, on your glutes, on your shoulders, like if you go and get them to do you, like take a look after a couple minutes. Like if your body's soaking it up, don't feel bad. Go back up to them and be like, hey, I'm sorry. I'm really dry. Like, do you mind putting a little more on me? Like like John said, like you work so hard to bring this look to stage. And if you're finding that like, hey, your skin is just soaking it up, like don't feel bad asking what you want, asking for them to put a little more on you, or going back repeated times. I think for my pro debut, I think I went back 5 times before we actually got on stage, because it was line up. Okay, wait. Okay, now we're going to do something else. Okay, went back. I literally ran back and I'm sorry, but just take those extra steps. But I'm sorry. How I read this was very much like, how do you like related to the carb intake, and like, how do you plan how much food to bring with you backstage? And my first thought, it's kind of, Joseph, you said it. It's like, well, if you have the look already nailed, there shouldn't be a ton of work to have to do like in that hour backstage. And to your point, like it starts with your timeline. So it technically starts prep week 1, which technically starts in the pre-prep phase of like, okay, well, where do you need to be, and at what point do you need to be there?
No, your answer was right on, because a lot of people think the magic's gonna happen in the last meal before you get on stage. But it's like if your timing of your meal, say it's a train day, and your timing of your meal was like a little off, like I ate it 30 minutes before. It's like, well, I'm not gonna get a pump at all today. Like nothing's gonna happen. It's like, no, like if you're hydrated and like you have a reasonable amount, like the timing isn't gonna really matter. If I'm eating my meal like an hour before I go on stage or 90 minutes before I go on stage, like, this won't be a game changer for me, and that's how it should be for your peak week. But people usually are doing the extreme protocols of manipulating water or diuretics to where the food that they do eat, which normally would have worked just fine, doesn't work anymore because they're in a position where they can't stay firm. And that's a lot of times the problem. So it's, finding the predictable look before, right?
John, I have a follow-up question. I know we're kind of hitting that hour mark, but I figured I'll ask it because it's so how would you advise someone, or what would you say to someone who, you can tell is nervous to drink on show day, even if, let's say that's what y'all been doing and hey, like this is your best look, and you assume, hey, they should know this, they've seen it, but come show day, that you can tell they're hesitant to get in enough fluid because it's the first time they've done it, or it's different than every peaking approach they've taken.
Yeah, that's really is the coaching aspect of the psychological side. And with any of those moments, you just have, because it's emotionally based, right? What's driving that? And so trying to show the logic without the emotion is usually how I would go. So I usually operate all logic and no emotion, robot, right?
I'll say, as someone that's super emotional and like an overthinker and all these things, someone that's worked under John, it works. It works big time. Yeah. I'm like, he's just telling me matter of factly, this is what we're doing. And this is the reasoning why. Like, even with how insane I am, my brain has no response. Like, you told me everything that I needed to hear, and I'm just going to shut up and listen.
Yeah. I think if you really lay out the logic and rationale, like you're almost debating someone, right? Not in an insulting way, but in a way it's where that you really like, wow, that makes so much sense. I can't even argue. So it's like,
it's like the answer is undeniable. Yeah.
It's like going back, okay, hey, I can't drink this water. Like, it's not going to be a good look. And show, like, these are your picks now. These are your picks like a day ago when you had that amount of water and your body weight came up to like a pound up. That was your best look. See how you look here? Do you want to go on stage like that? Oh, hell yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, we need to bring body weight up to here and have that same amount of fluid you had the day before to make that happen. Do you think not drinking water is going to grip you the same look that we know that already did that? Because we're rolling the dice now. You're like, well, I don't know. Can you argue against it? And that would be a hard case to make. So I think laying out that logic. I mean, if you have to go as extreme as like showing pictures, these are the pics of when we had water in. You look awesome here. And I think that's the time as a coach, like, you hype them up and make them feel really good and excited about, like, that's exactly, my look's awesome. Like, I had water. Yeah, water's awesome. Like H2O. And you put them on stage like that. So I think that, show them logic, get them hyped up about the look, the hydrated, striated look, and look it that way.
I wanted to second what Joseph said. Like, your approach for me this season was incredible because Joseph, I'm the same way. I overthink. I am very emotional, but working with John and having, like, you can't be emotional when someone's presenting you logic that is, you can't argue it. I'm like,
irrefutable.
I have 24 days of pictures to support what this guy's saying. Oh, all of a sudden I know better. No, like, I'm just nervous. That's the reality. But I think that nervousness is the case for a lot of both male and female competitors who they've never tried that approach, that predictable approach.
Yeah. For me, one example too, like, your question was a perfect example of something personally that I had always struggled with, like, was the water thing at the very end. Like, I worked with some old school coaches. I did prep by myself. And like, I just had, for whatever reason, convinced myself my best look for show day was like basically 0 water, and like just try to swallow down as many like dry carbs as you could. And then, like we talked about, like I've talked about ad nauseum, like John's process where it's like, hey, we're ready at 3 weeks out. Like, start sending me photos every day with your weight post workout, and let's see what it looks like. And it took like maybe a week of doing that, where John pointed out, he's like, you are like notably better after you're hydrated and full of food and water than you are first thing in the morning. I had always just done pics fasted, and you see them and you're like, oh yeah, this is, I want to look like this. Like, this is dry. And then you just go about your day and assume that it's all lost from that point forward. And then, John has me sending pics 3 meals in, a gallon of water in, 8,000 steps in, whatever, after a workout. And it's like, yeah, I would sign on the dotted line right now to look like this on stage in 3 weeks. So I'm just going to do whatever led to this.
You get the clients that they'll send pics, or like, they'll send their fast, like, these are terrible. Like, if you saw me at the gym, like, that's how I really look. And I'm way leaner than what I really am. And there's truth to that. It's like, hey, for a coaching perspective, we just want consistency to see, like, these things. But you absolutely should be having, like, seeing your clients at other times of day and other lighting, because a lot of times that them saying, like, I look way better at the gym, that's maybe close to the stage look that you might want them having to go out on, because if they're like full, they have a pump, they look more conditioned. It's like, yeah, there probably is something to that. Now, do I want to assess them for a coaching aspect around that? No, not for changes, because that varies, right? With training, like train legs today, so upper body looks super flat or something, right? So I agree.
I think it also aids in teaching their eye. And that's something, a part of my programs right now. I ask clients, like, hey, what do you see? It's not so much the check-in pictures that I need you to analyze. When you're getting out of the shower, when you're in the gym, like those day-to-day things that I'm not going to necessarily infer from your weekly pictures that are consistent. What do you see? And let's assess if that's close to what I see, or if that's a little bit different. And I think that information, it's useful, not just in season, it's great in off season too. It kind of gets them to think about, okay, how much of what they're feeling about their body, how much of that is objective. And I think that's really useful when you're trying to teach someone to be able to not necessarily coach themselves, but you're trying to teach them to trust what they're doing and trust their own eye.
No, I think that's a great aspect, because you're building autonomy with your clients. And one of the big drivers for motivation for your clients is so they do have some level of autonomy and feeling like they have some control and direction in the decision process. And if they're more educated in the process, they'll be able to get better biofeedback, and they'll have a more enjoyable, sustainable process in bodybuilding from actually learning a little bit. I know, like, some coaches are just adamant on not teaching, but go to any other sport and there is a teaching aspect that has to happen. So if you're like, oh, here's your diet food, go, you're training, like, just go do it. Don't ask questions. I just wouldn't be the coaching approach for me. I've done that. And by being a self-learner, you kind of pull out the feedback and learn, but you have a coach that is able to pull that out for you and learn. Because if you're like, man, my clients, they just are terrible at telling me what I need to know. It's like, that's your job to help them know what to tell you. Like, it's not just like day one, what to tell yourself on biofeedback. You have to teach your client that. And that's part of the coaching process and building the autonomy.
Well, and even if what they feel, because I've experienced this, I think, with you, and it's been incredibly helpful. It's important that I communicate something, even if it's not correct, even if I'm wrong. I need to be able to communicate it, because how are you going to know that's what I'm thinking? How will you know from your client that's their reality, their belief is like, no, I'm looking better, or I'm looking worse. If you don't know where their headspace is, it's really hard to give that guidance. But yeah, I completely agree. I think the teaching aspect, it builds a lot of confidence, and it's not as straightforward as people want it to be. It takes some digging, it takes some unconventional questions, and even just from the very get-go, having that dynamic where, like, hey, no question is dumb. It's okay if it feels dumb, but, like, let's talk about it. And if it's fundamental, maybe I can provide you with additional resources. But yeah, that, I think the experience for both parties is going to be a lot better when you feel like the person who's coaching you wants you involved.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep dragging this one off. But another aspect is, don't assume that, because I mentioned about a beginner, but also don't assume even someone at a high level necessarily knows what to tell you. I was coaching like a WPD pro, and we were on prep, and so I like, how do you feel, like, fatigue wise? And I went through a few things. She's like, was just completely tanked. And she's like, well, this is how my last preps felt. That's just how prep feels. I'm like, no, That's not how
this
prep
is bad. Yeah.
how it's
Yeah.
that's how it has felt before. So that was their baseline of this is how prep's supposed to feel. When to me, it's not. It's like when you get the feedback of like training's good. It's like what does good mean? To you, good might mean something way different than it does to me. So you have to kind of like pull that apart to make sure like they're on the same page feedback wise with you. But you're right, if you never ask, you won't ever know. So having like a comprehensive assessment for your check-ins is really important, having those conversations.
Yeah,
well,
I agree.
Maybe we should wrap up there.
Yeah, that sounds
Cool.
good. I know we covered a handful of questions, but we can definitely do another one with the other ones we got.
Yeah, that sounds good. And for anyone listening, if y'all are interested in being coached by one of us, I'll put the link below, but j3university.com. We have a page just for all the coaches to submit an application. So y'all can check that out. Any questions that you have for us, you're welcome to leave. If you're watching YouTube, you can leave them below and we can put that on our list. We already have a long list, but if there's a great one, we'd love to answer it for that. So anyway, anyone listening, appreciate y'all tuning in, and thank you, Cory and Joseph, for coming on. Later, everybody.